Thank you for connecting in to our training today. We are going to be covering our quarter and year-end payroll processes, starting out with some preparation and review that you can do now to get a head start. Just a little bit of introduction. My name is Hannah Taratz. I am the training manager. I handle all of the initial training of new customers, and I'll be conducting the session today. Of course, as you're aware of, we have our full support department that you'll be able to work with any questions or anything that comes up during this webinar that you may need to be working on corrections or adjustments. The support department will be happy to help you with any of those questions or assistance that you need with anything that we cover today. So the first thing that I want to mention, we have a lot of new users that are new to Datatech and may not be familiar with how we handle our year-end updates. Typically, we get the tax rates for a new year on the second or third week of December. What we will do is we will email all of our customers, and we will notify you that the year-end update is ready to download. So at any point once you receive that email, you can go on your Tools menu to the Check for Updates to see if there's an update available. So this is the message that you'll receive, that there is an update available to download. Would you like to download it? And also you'll see this box here, would you like to see the release notes? Especially with our year-end update, we recommend you display and print out the release notes because that will have all of our main changes, new enhancements, new features, instructions for that included in those release notes. So when you hit yes, it'll give you the release notes. We'll break out the changes and new options, what's been added by date. So if you regularly do updates, you can scan this, down to the point that you last viewed the document. So if I hit download here, then it would proceed to download and install the updates. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just go ahead and cancel for now. Now you do have to do that update when everybody is out of the program. So we recommend doing it either at the end of the day or maybe on a weekend. And if you are a multi-user environment, we recommend doing that on the server so it installs a little bit faster. Now the other area where we have our documentation for our year-end processes is on the Help menu under Year-End Help. Is there anyone else that's having problems? If you're listening to it over your speakers, you might check your speaker volume at the bottom. Or if you're calling in over the phone, you might hit the volume on your phone. I don't have any other way on my end of adjusting the volume. If there's anyone else that's having a hard time hearing me, just go ahead and put that in the questions, and if I need to, I can try and switch over to a microphone. You can also switch between the computer audio and the phone call if you want to try one or the other. I know some people that have had problems with their internet access have found it better getting the audio over the phone than the speakers. I'll try and adjust my headset here a little bit as well. Now, in the year-end help section, we'll have an introduction and information on installing the update. And then below that, we'll have the different topics or different tax forms and information available there from the help. So if you have any questions on current forms, filling out the forms, or the closing or quarterly year flows, and you don't have this manual that I prepared for you handy, you can always access it from the year-end help. The other thing that we like to recommend, if you are not familiar with all of the payroll forms, is to review the instructions for each of the forms. Now, this is especially pertinent for companies that are new to doing insurance and having to print the employer-sponsored health insurance annual cost on the W-2s, and also some companies that have started doing pre-tax insurance plans. There are different codes and different things that go on the forms that we're not going to cover in specific detail in this webinar. We're not going, this is document just on the instructions for printing W-2s. It's 32 pages. We don't have the time to cover every individual code and every item. I'll mention a few things when we get there, but you should review the instructions for the forms and be familiar with items that may pertain to your company. So the W-2 instructions would be available from the IRS.gov along with the 940, 941, 943, all of our federal forms. And then you would refer to the EDD's website for your instructions on your state forms, your DE-9 and DE-9C. Now the next big thing that we have right now is everybody's getting their W-2s ordered. So one of the big questions is, how do we figure out how many W-2s do we need? So there is an option, and you'll see this on page 5 of the PDF. If you go to your payroll menu and then year-end tax reporting, there's an option to count employees with year-to-date wages. Since I haven't closed out my year yet, I can say count employees in the employee file and then click begin count. So I have 401 employees with year-to-date wages. So of course you would add any W-2s in for new employees that may work in December, and also W-2s for corrections. So you may, in this example, may order 500 W-2s. Now, we don't require you to get the W-2s from any one supplier, but we do recommend the advanced group, which is in Fresno, because they are familiar with our formats. So we published in our blog at the end of October the form numbers and information for ordering your forms. So if you did not get that information, if you just go to our blog, datatechag.com, you can scroll down through the topics to get to the W-2 ordering information, or I included that as a link in your PDF document. So our main laser forms are the L3 up, L4 up. Those will print 3 or 4 employees per page respectively. Very smaller companies may do a 2 per page format. But when you do a 2 per page format, you have to do multiple copies and collate them. So we like doing the 2 up. If you're reporting to the IRS, you can do just the IRS format, and you could do the employee's copy on a 3 or 4 per page, so you don't have to do any collating. And then there's sets for multiple 50 or 100 employee sets, depending on how many you're going to need. So this blog goes through a couple of those different options that I mentioned, which formats might be best for different situations, so you can refer to that. And if you have any questions, you can give us a call. If you're doing 1095-C, if you're doing Affordable Care Act reporting, you can also get those forms from the advanced group. And there was a note just in the questions that you can get free forms on the IRS site. I think they do limit that when you do get into a high quantity, but you can always check with the IRS to see if you can get your forms for free. Thank you for that. So now we'll get into actually starting to review your employee information. Now, depending on the size of your operation and how many employees you employ in a year, we often find some of our large labor contractors end up with duplicate employee accounts. Okay, there's just one more note before I go on. You can order from the IRS 100 at a time, but you could place multiple orders if you want to go that route. Thank you, Tracy, for that. So there's a few different ways to review your employees, to look for duplicate employees where you may need to merge their files. You may also want to look for missing or incomplete information, like mailing addresses, city, incomplete social security numbers. So the first thing you can do is on your payroll menu under the employee list, you can use the abbreviated detail list. Now you can simply just print this in alphabetic order and scan it for maybe employees that look like they have similar names. One of the things that you can do when you run this employee list is you can select just employees that have year-to-date wages. So then you are just reviewing employees that are going to be reported this year. So the alphabetic option will go alphabetic by their name key. So of course that may not always give you the employees kind of close together if they have multiple surnames. But this is one way of scanning for similar names that you may need to look and see if you need to merge employee accounts. If you just run it detail, you see here we don't, or abbreviated, we don't have their address. So you can always change your report option to abbreviated landscape. And now you'll see employees that have year-to-date wages that are missing addresses. And so you may want to go through and see if they're current active employees, or if you have their W-4 or I-9 and maybe they filled it out after they were initially put in and the address didn't get updated. Now the more expanded way of kind of reviewing your employees is exporting to Excel and then using the Excel export sorting options. So to export your employee list to Excel, you just click on the Custom button, and then you go to Customize, and then give it a title. And what this does is it saves your selections. So we can just put in here Employee Export, and then you click on the columns to select the columns that you want to export. So maybe, for example, instead of doing first name or last name, first name in one column, we can make those separate. We can add in here last name, and you can just double click, or you can hit add, and then first name. And then if you want to change the ordering, you might want to move those up if you want to play with that, how the ordering that it exports. And so maybe another item we want to do is look for duplicates on the I-9. We could send the I-9 or their driver's license. If you want to do street address instead of mailing address, you can select any of those options. So once you've selected the columns that you want to appear on the report and be exported to Excel, you just hit OK. You hit OK again, and then down here at the bottom you select where you want to save the Excel file, and then give it a name. Once you do that and you hit the preview button, then it will preview a print, but also generate your Excel file. So now we have the Excel file generated. Now I mentioned you can do your tools through Excel to do some sorting. So to do a simple sort, you can hold down your Control key on your keyboard and hit the letter A. That does a Control All or A for all, selects all your fields. And then you go to Data, and then Sort. And then you can sort or select the column you want to sort by. So you already did I-9. It asks if you want to do, there's a mix of numbers and letters. You want to sort them as numbers, or do you want to do them separately? I'll just say sort anything that looks like a number as a number. And so now we have our I-9s ordered. Now, what I have done to look for duplicates, you can do this on their first name or last name, but when you highlight a column on your Home tab, you can go to Conditional Formatting, and then there's a Highlight Cells Rules option, and you can tell it to highlight duplicate values. So you can select your color variations there, and then it will highlight any I-9s that are the same number in two different employee files. So then we can verify, is this Marcos? Is this the same employee? Is Adriana, are they the same employee? We're missing address here, so it gives you a little bit more information to search off of. And so again, you can do that. You can sort by their last name and do search for duplicates, or search different ways in Excel to try and look at your employee files to determine duplicates or maybe bad employee counts. There's a question right now on employees in Mexico and needing a country. I will double check on that for you. I know we've added a country in our vendor file, so that may be something that we can add to the employees. Let me make a note of that. I'll get back to you, Heather, on that. I'll check with the programmers. Now, the employee list also has an option to print invalid Social Security numbers. Invalid Social Security numbers would be any numbers that begin with 0 or have a field with zeros in it, or begins with a 9, or has a field with 666. So it doesn't look like I have any in these files. But that's another item you can run on this employee list to see if there's any corrections you need to make. Any questions on running the employee list or looking at it, sorting in Excel? We'll get to moving checks from one account to another in just a moment. Okay, and so our pages there in your PDF document just go through a few of those options. I'll be honest, I'm not an Excel expert. I've just learned your little tools here and there. So I included a little bit of tips, but you may have some more ideas or other ways that you can use that Excel export to review employee information. Now, if you do find accounts that you do want to merge, then on page 9, you can mark this. This is our tool to move payroll checks or merge employee accounts by moving all checks from one account to another. So this tool is located on the Payroll and then Checks menu, and it's the Move Checks to New Employee. There's two options on this screen. One is simply just to move one check. This would be used in a case where you handed out the checks and maybe one employee cashed another employee's checks. They got swapped because they had similar names. But if you need to move a period of time, you can use the Move by Date tab. So we can select here which employee account we want to move the checks off of. We can put in our period of time that we want to move the checks. We don't have to go through one by one. And then we can select the employee that we want to move the checks to. And then when you do that move checks, it's going to give you a notice if you're doing this with dates in a prior quarter that you need to file an amended return. We have a link to that in the PDF document. So then it's going to move those checks, and it's going to update the quarters and years the employees have checks for. So now when we get to our year end, everything's going to be compiled and be on one account for our W-2 processing. We don't automatically do the amendments for this state. So if you're in California, there's a link in the PDF document to make adjustments to the BE9. And actually, that was the instructions. BE9 correction. So if you go to the search, you can get to, oh, that's instructions again. Where's the actual form? Is here. And I'll put that into the PDF. So basically what you have to tell the state is the original Social Security number, and you would enter in 0, that you're zeroing out those subject wages, and then you'd put the new Social Security number that you want to report them under, and then enter the wages in there. Yes, and there's a question about would it be best to run this by quarter so there's less likely to have to amend. This is something that you can also, we're covering this as part of our year-end training, but this is a process that you can go through each quarter. And if you can catch these quarter by quarter, that would be great, and catching the mistakes a lot sooner and combining the accounts. If you catch it before you do your filing, then you won't have to do amendments. So this is strictly for, finding mistakes after you've actually done your report, so you would have to do an amendment. And I will add in, I'll add in this other link in our documentation, and so I can send an updated document out that has both of those links, the instructions and the form. Any questions on the move payroll checks? Okay, there's one other note about negative wages. Now, when you need to void a payroll check, depending on the situation, usually our support department will recommend, if you're voiding a payroll check from a prior quarter, to date the void in the current quarter so you don't have to adjust any prior quarter wages. And that's usually in the situation that you're reissuing the check. So the quarter the wages were originally incurred stays where it is. The void with the negative entry and a reissue with a positive makes a net change of 0 in your current quarter. However, we've had some customers, they did the void, but they weren't doing a reissue. And so it caused negative wages because the employee was no longer working and had no wages in the current quarter. So that's something that you just have to be cognizant if you're doing voids, that you can't have negative wages. If you are doing a void and it's a prior quarter and the employee is no longer working, you need to date the void in the prior quarter and do the amendment as well. And that's something that comes up in our support department where somebody has done a void. Well, we have to assist you in changing the check date so that there's not negative wages in the current quarter, and then have you file the amendment. So if you can just catch that before you void, then that will save you a little bit of trouble later on. Any questions on that? Okay, the next thing that I'm just going to make a brief note on, and this doesn't apply to everyone, but those that have fringe benefits or any kind of special tax wages that need to be reflected on the W-2, we recommend getting those on a check before the end of the year so that they'll automatically be populated on the W-2 and you don't have to do any manual adjustments to the archive file after it's been closed. So what's fringe benefit? Fringe benefit can encompass a lot of different things, and that's one of the things we're not going to advise you on the tax code. But for example, in our business, we have some company vehicles. Well, the employee's personal usage of that is supposed to be taxed. You may also have a company where they pay for life insurance benefits for an officer or owner of a company. Sometimes over a certain amount that has to be taxed. So the employee doesn't receive any money, but they have to pay taxes on those benefits. So the first thing to look at is in your wage types under your payroll setup menu. There's already a code in here for fringe benefits, but recently we've added a new setting under the other income type. We used to just call it other, but we actually made a code that says taxable fringe benefits. When we do the check, then it'll tell the program we need to tax this, but we're not paying it as paid wages. And that'll be defined also by this base pay type being memo wages. Now, while we're in the wage types, there's also another wage type that you can look at. And I'm not sure if I have this example in this window, but if you, 401k is a good example. In the W-2s, if you're doing a pension or an IRA plan, there is a code that can be populated automatically in box 12. So before you do the archive at the end of the year, you can look at your wage codes used for your 401k deduction, or if you do an HSA contribution, and set this so that the program will automatically set that code up when it creates the W-2s. So briefly, what you would do on the employee's check is you would put in their normal weekly wages. So let's say we're doing a salary here. Then you can add a line for the fringe benefit. So maybe the value of their personal use of a car was $2,000. So you can see here the gross wages doesn't change what the employee is getting paid, but the taxes do. So you may want to adjust their federal state income tax if you don't want to withhold a high amount. Technically, they do have to pay taxes on that, so if you want to go ahead and factor that in, leave those taxes as calculated, you can. We have some customers that add in onto their check a little bit more wages to kind of compensate for some of those taxes. So that's your choice there. But that's how you would add the fringe benefits. The program will automatically get that on their W-2. Any questions on that? Okay, the next item that you can review before the end of the year kind of goes along with the 401k or other pre-tax wages. A lot of companies are new to insurance, and some insurance companies set up their premiums as pre-tax, did like a cafeteria or AFLAC, not a cafeteria 125 plan. Some AFLAC plans, like disability, are pre-tax, but some, like cancer insurance, aren't. And this, again, we are not experts on taxability issues. I don't know every plan and what the taxability status is, so if you have any questions about premiums employees are paying for anything, whether it's pre-tax, talk to your insurance company first and find out how it's set up, because they do have to do certain reports with the IRS if they're setting it up as pre-tax. And so we've had some cases, then they found out that it was pre-tax and had to go and make adjustments. So before the end of the year, this is something that you may want to review if you do have any pre-tax plans. So the easiest way to review that is to use the earnings records. We go on the payroll menu to reports and use the employee earnings records. You want to run this for all employees. You can put your year-to-date, starting and ending date. I'm going to take the state out so I capture all states since I'm using a multi-state set of files here. And then in my selections, I'm going to unselect each check and line items and voids, and then I'm going to select print totals by wage type. Once the report has been generated, go to your last page. And what you want to check is your deduction here. That would be pre-tax. That matches the totals by wage type for that tax. That's how we know the $67.50 is going to come off of their taxable earnings, because that's the special wage type for that deduction. And if you need to see, if you want to review how those are connected, that is on your setup menu and then your miscellaneous deductions. And then there's a wage type that is attached to the deduction. The program sees that wage type, and then on the wage type setup, it applies the tax calculations. So here we have withhold federal and withhold state income tax unchecked. That means it's pre-tax on those two, but taxable on everything else. So reviewing this now, if you find that maybe a pre-tax line was missed on a check, or those don't match, you may need to go employee by employee to find that, then you can give our support department a call, and then we can assist you in correcting through the check header and getting that on and updating the correct taxable wages. There's a question on giving a bonus to employees to go to fringe or pre-tax, or should be given separately on the 1099. If it is compensation, then it is best to do it through the payroll system and have the tax calculations flow through the payroll system to the W-2s. So you can enter in on a check. If you're going to do a fringe benefit but you want to give them a bonus to offset that, then you can use the wage type of bonus. And then you can calculate, the amount you want to do for the bonus that, would cover their taxes or whatever you want to, compensate them for. That is one thing that we don't have is a backwards calculator. I know some programs like QuickBooks, you can put in what you want for the net and it'll go back and figure out what the gross should be. There's some online calculators that do that. But this will, it's going to increase their wages because you are giving this as a bonus, but that should be taxable wages as well. If I didn't answer your question, go ahead and just let me know. We can clarify. Sorry, there just got a little something stuck in my throat. Give me just a sec. Any other questions on the fringe or pre-tax wages? Okay, the next couple things that you can start reviewing is your tax payments and whether or not there needs to be any corrections to your check dates. So the next report you may want to review is the tax liability report. The tax liability report is the report that the system uses to generate the tax liability on your 940, 941, and 943 forms. So we can come in on the reports menu and run the tax liability report and run it for all of our taxes, all of our states there. Now this is going to give us each payroll date and your tax liabilities. So if you notice here, we have some payroll on the 21st, and then there's some negatives, some voids on the 22nd. That may be a case where you want to move those payroll checks to combine those onto one date. This is something you can also do manually when you're completing the forms, but some of our customers like this to be really clean and move those checks before they close out the year. So this is another example here. We have just maybe one check that was done on the 24th. Maybe when they printed that check, they just forgot to change the date, and they want to move those to the 26th. Now you also may want to run your tax payments, and at the bottom of this report, it's going to give you your total liabilities for the year. So then you can make sure that you are on track for your total payments for the year, and if you're not, then you may want to see where a payment was missed, or make up that payment before you get to the end of January. Now to go along with that, the next page, that was on page 12, the next page, page 13, is reviewing your FUI payments. Now I'm not going to go through all the details about the credit reduction. Hopefully everybody's familiar with this issue with our 940 taxes. California still owes the federal government $3.5 billion. Until they pay that back, we will have an additional 0.3% added to FUI each year. So if you haven't been making those payments, because it's not required, so we have customers that just let it go throughout the year, they make the payment in January. If you want to see what that is going to be, then you can go on your payroll menu to the quarterly tax reporting and run the taxable wages by quarter. Change your tax here to your FUI, run it for all states, and then run totals only. You'll have your base rate. Oops, let me change one thing here. We need this little box here, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. What am I missing? Oh, I know we do need California in there. I'm sorry, because it's California determines the credit reduction. So leave California in there. So the first line here, liability, is our regular FUI. So for this payroll, we would owe normally just $9,384. The second lines here print the credit reduction. So we have each quarter, we have an additional 1.8% that you'll owe for a total for the year of $28,000. So you have to add these together. So your net 940 for the year is going to be, $37,500, whatever that comes out to. So you can see this rate is, continually, as I mentioned, going to be increasing every year until those loans are paid off. If you're not already paying this throughout the year, We recommend going to your Tools menu and then Program Setup. On the Payroll tab, under the Payroll Journal, there's an option, Accrue Credit Reduction Tax with FUI. That will accrue it, and it'll show what you owe on your payroll tax deposits window and also include that on the wage and tax summary. And that you can make a note of that if you're not sure if you have that set and can't check it right now. That is on page 13. And again, I just for your own information recapped, all other states have paid off their loans. The only ones remaining are California and Virgin Islands. So if you're in Arizona or another state, you are not responsible for the health, the FUI. There's a question about the health insurance box on the W-2. We'll get to W-2s in just a moment, but yes, when we get to the end of the year, the health insurance will be compiled from the HR program if you're using the HR program. And then there's also, we'll get to a window where you can edit the information in those box 12 and 14. Any questions on reviewing tax payments or liabilities? Okay, so now we're actually going to get into the actual closing process. I know we're mainly focusing on some of the year-end here, but we're going to briefly just go through the quarter closing because you will close your fourth quarter before you get to the year-end closing. So our main screen that we're going to be working from for closing our quarter and our year is on the Payroll menu, our Payroll Tax Reports Control Center. We've tried to streamline this process, and I'll explain what this process is doing in just a moment. So we have our year, and then we select our quarter. Now what we're doing, these two different reports, is we're making sure that the program is balanced between employee totals and check totals. So what happens internally is each time a check is printed, the program updates these totals in the employee file, the quarter-to-date totals and the year-to-date totals. And this is where the totals come from that print on the employee's check stub. It just makes it a lot faster. We're not having to compile totals every time we do some basic reports in their check stub. So when we hit preview here, it will compile the totals from the employee files. And then the payroll journal will go and compile the totals from the checks. Most of the time they're balanced, and all you have to do to finish is hit the Archive Print Clear button. But occasionally, if something is not posted correctly to the check file, or something didn't get updated to the employee file, a network glitch, or if somebody was tinkering around and manually tried to edit those totals, these will not be balanced. And so in the material, it has a little section there, what if the totals don't agree? Again, we've tried to streamline it so the program will automatically recalculate the employee file totals from the checks and try and look for any corrections that need to be made. And then it'll prompt you to rerun the wage detail report. And that, again, that's a simple process 99% of the time. That fixes everything. Everything will balance out, and you can close. If it still doesn't, then sometimes you do have to call our support department for some additional diagnostics. So then we simply hit the Archive button, and then it's going to basically take those totals, and it's going to move them and create what we call an archive. And this is similar to what I just mentioned, the employee file totals, where it creates a file of a total for each employee. So when you do your quarter reports, It doesn't have to go through and reread the checks every time you do a report. It's already compiled their quarter-to-date totals. So then once we have done the archive print clear, we can move on and close our year. With the normal quarter closing process, then once you do that part, that's all you have to do. You can go do checks, and then later on you can come back and do your quarterly forms. Now I'm going to go through briefly the quarterly forms, and then we'll move on to our year. The taxable wages by quarter doesn't have to be printed. It's an optional form, but that's what I was just running a moment ago to look at the FUI taxes. So if you have any questions about any of the taxability of the wages, the taxes that have limits are available here for you to run. The state reports is for anybody filing on paper. We have multiple states that we do paper forms for. Now in California, there is a new law, or not new law, but they changed the requirements that everybody over 10 employees has to file electronically. So if you're a small business and you've been under the 250, well, I shouldn't say just small, but I mean, a lot of our customers under 250 were still doing paper. You will start having to do electronic like everybody else that's been over 250. So I'll just briefly show you that because it's affecting a lot of our customers that didn't used to do electronic reporting. When you do this to paper, it'll just bring in your tax rate from your tax rate file. That's not correct. Besides changing it here, you also want to change it in your tax rate file so it's correct going forward. And that's just a reminder too, if you get your notice from the EDD and your rate is changed for 2017, remember after your last payroll to change that in the state tax rate file. So if you are doing a paper, if you hit your preview button, in California this would be the DE9C, does the detail. And then on the last page, we have the DE9. This is our audit, so if we put our payments in, that will print our payments and give the balance of taxes due at the end of the form. So now, if you're going to be filing electronically, what you'll do is you'll mark this Generate Electronic File button. And then you'll just go ahead and do the printer preview still. It'll bring up a prompt just verifying your company information and who's the transmitter. The top portion is the submitter. The bottom portion is the employer information. And then it's going to create the files for you, and it puts them into the directory where your data files are located. And I'll pull that up through the Explorer prompt in just a moment. A trick for this is to go to the last page. Normally you want to print this out, but put this last page in front. And this last page has the prompts to where the electronic files are stored. Now, we have a video on our website, and I put that, I don't know where I put it in here. I put the link in somewhere in here. If you haven't done electronic reporting before, you'll need to go to the EDD's e-services website and register for an account. And then after creating that file, you can go to our website and look at our video to see all of the prompts and how to upload the file through the state's website. When you get to the prompt to select the file, you'll use the path on that report to go into your directory where your accounting files are located. And then you'll go into the directory where the data files are located, usually be like data 1, data 2. And then there'll be a folder called Mag Media. It was just the old terminology that they used to use, magnetic media, when we used to send this in on floppy disk. And then it'll have a file for the year and then the quarter. You're going to be uploading both files because, again, this is two forms. The DE9C is the detail and the DE9 is the reconciliation. So you'll upload both of these files to the EDD. Sorry, my headset just died, so I had to switch over to speakerphone. There was just a question about the screen. The screen keeps rolling up. Try and put the webinar in full screen. It could be that my screen is bigger than yours and it's giving you a scroll bar, so depending on where I'm at, it may scroll. You might try changing the size of the window. That might prevent that. Now, if you are in an alternate state that we don't do the a specific format like Oregon, you'll do the generic report format. Oh, I don't have Oregon in this file. And that will give you a file with all of the totals and will generate a generic form to give you those totals. But usually most of our customers in other states are going to be large enough that are doing the electronic reporting, and we'll get to that in just a moment, creating the electronic file. Now, one note about all of these reports that are including tax payments. There is a tax payments button, or not a tax payments, but a list payments button that will tell the check inquiry. And we just give you a little reminder here, okay, we're doing this for the fourth quarter, here's the date. But you may need to include dates outside of that range or subtract for any penalties or anything that shouldn't be included, or any payments made after the quarter. So when it goes to the check inquiry, you can change your starting and ending date to narrow down your time period for the payment. And then you can grab your total payments from there, or you may need to print this out and then subtract any payments that shouldn't be included in the totals for the quarter. Now, if you don't keep track of your payments through our system, we have some people that use just the payroll system. They do everything else through QuickBooks or through another accounting software. Then you can just go, run your checks, get your totals, and then you can just type them in. You can also, if you're doing your payments online, you can usually through the e-services websites and the EFTPS run your year-to-date history to get your payments. Any questions on the quarterly report? Okay, I'll try and get a little bit closer to the phone here. I guess just some more issues with the volume. So the next item on your quarterly process is if you have regular employees, then you have your 941 form. So it'll default to the quarter that you're viewing. and then you just click on the Calculate Totals button to calculate all of your totals from your regular employees. If there are any adjustments that you want to make for rounding, then you can use line 7 to enter in rounding adjustments. Then on line 11, you'll enter in your total payments for the quarter to calculate your balance due. Now, if you have tips, if you have any other adjustments for line 5 or 7, then you can make those accordingly. Again, I'm not going to go through every single line on here. You should use the instructions if you need to familiarize yourself with what each of those lines is doing. Now, in part 2, you'll put in your state where you're making your payments, and then you'll select whether line 10 is less than 2,500. Here we're not. We need to say either we're a monthly scheduler or a semi-weekly. If you're monthly, then it's going to use your tax liability by month to complete your form. So here I'm off cents between what my total taxes are. I can just hit my adjust tax liability to make my rounding adjustment. And then I can generate my form. Now, it may not look clean on the screen. For some reason, these PDFs look a little blurry on the screen, but when you print them out, they will be clear and be exactly as the form looks on printed paper. If you are semi-weekly, then what you'll need to do is click on the tab up at the top for the Schedule B. And again, this comes from the tax liability report. If this is not up to date, if you haven't run the tax liability report, what you'll do is click on the Update Tax Liability button to have the program re-pull in the amounts from the tax liability report. And again, if you want to make any corrections manually, here I don't have any months here where I have any anything out of place, but this is where you could adjust, manually delete an amount and add it to another day if there's something that's just processed on the wrong day. And then when you preview from the Schedule B, then it'll put your liability in and so all of your amounts on the Schedule B form. If you are in states where you're doing electronic filing, we have in the PDF document, instead of using the quarterly state report, customers in Florida, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Oregon, and Texas will use the electronic filing button instead. When you come in, you'll again select your quarter and year, and then select where you want to save your file, or you can just leave it the default directory. Oh, let me just reset my state here. For some reason, I didn't grab Arizona. And then that will create the file that you will upload to your respective state. And it gives you a printout to tell you where it saves that file. So when you go online to however your state is set up to report, you can upload that file. There's a question about the 941. Yes, the 941, nothing has changed. So that's why I'm kind of not going in too much detail here, because everything for this quarter is going to be exactly like the previous quarters. Any other questions on any of the quarterly items? Okay, so now we'll go on to our year end. If anybody's doing Arizona, we also have the Arizona quarterly report that's in your documentation that is accessible from the quarterly tax reporting. There's one additional report on the quarterly tax reporting that is not on the Tax Reports Control Center. So once we've closed our quarter, we come into our year-end closing tab, and we're going to do the same process. So again, the wage detail is going to look to the year-to-date totals on the employee file. So we just hit preview on that. And then the payroll journal will do a comparison to the check file. And then if you want to print those reports, it will preview the reports. If you're in full screen mode, they get pushed behind the program. But you can click on the program button from your bottom start bar, and you can pull your previews up from there, or you can minimize it and print those out. We recommend you keep these paper copies as backup. Now, I have done an archive and just preparing for this webinar today. So I'm getting a message, there's already entries in the archive file. Do you want to overwrite the data? I'm going to go ahead and say yes, because I've made some corrections, done some new checks, and I want to update the totals. And then we'll talk about that a little bit later as far as having to come back and make corrections and reopening the year and re-archiving, because that is something that occasionally happens. Now, I had a message there that there's a check in the file saying, hey, you still have a check, you sure you want to close? I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. If you need to actually process any of the checks, then you would not do that. You'd say no to continue to go back and process any checks still in the batch. So again, this is all that has to be completed before the year ends. If what we actually recommend is wait a week or two before you actually start generating your reports, your 940, your 943, doing your W-2s, because there's always those cases where you may need to do a void and reissue, or you may find that there's corrections, and so giving yourself a little bit of time to handle those before you close is always a good idea. And we'll actually, because our support department gets a much higher volume of calls the first week of the year, we will usually tell people or schedule appointments if people want help with forms later on, again, a second or third week, because that first week we're just trying to make sure everybody's cleared, everybody's moved to 2017, everybody has their tax rates installed, and then we have all of our new customers that are doing their first payroll, making sure they're getting their checks out, and then we have more time the second, third weeks to work on any problems with reports or any corrections. Now, my files, I had actually done some corrections. I should have left some mistakes in my files. But when you do that archive, if there are any issues with employee information or negative wages, you're going to get an exception report. Now, that exception report may or may not affect doing your W-2 files or doing your forms. You may have employees where you're missing a mailing address, city, state, or zip, and you don't have access to that employee and cannot get correct information. But it will give you a list so that you can go back and research some of those items, and that's why When we initially started out with this webinar, I said it's good to start doing that now, so you don't have to do it at this point. The main things that will keep you from generating an electronic file are the last two items, which are invalid characters in the employee name. There's no numbers allowed in employee names, so some people actually had a typo where they had 0 instead of an O. That can prevent the W-2 file from being accepted. And also, as I mentioned earlier, you can't have negative wages or tax deductions. So those have to be corrected. So if you have the two items that may prevent you from doing your electronic file, then we need to go back and make corrections to those before you generate the file. Now, as I mentioned, that process is archiving the totals. It's putting all of the totals for the year to date in a separate archive file. So we're going to look at a few things now that may need to be reviewed or edited in the archive file manually. And this is also where we are, where we are going to do our adjustments or do our additions for our health insurance. So from your payroll tax reports control center, actually I'll do this manually first. From the year-end tax reporting menu, you can view the entries in that archive file using the Edit Year-to-Date Archive File option. First thing that you would do is do your lookup on the year. So here we can see we're at 2011. Well, we want to jump to 2016. And then once we're at our 2016 entries, we can put in the employee number that we want to view. So here are our reported wages. So they received $20,300, but we had some fringe benefits. So their federal income tax wages is $25,000. Now we may want to double check with those that are fringe on the W-2 information that fringe did get updated to the fringe benefits other income field. And that is updated correctly because we did the wage code setup before we did the check. But if that wasn't done properly and you want to do a manual edit, you can manually put this in and manually adjust the wages. But you have to be cautious if the archive file is ever recompiled or totals are fixed to the archive file, that you could lose manual editing that was done. There's just a question about somebody that has H-2A employees. H-2A employees, yes, you're going to be going through the same process because H-2A employees, they changed the rules from printing 1099s to printing W-2s. And H-2A employees, their wages are actually subject to federal income tax. So they will not have the other wages, Social Security, Medicare, and depending on your state, may not have state income tax wages, but they will have year-to-date wages and federal income wages. So back to the W-2 information, the other thing that you may want to verify is if you are doing a 401k, we have the deferred comp and the 401k setting for the deferred comp flag. It's pulled that in automatically. Now, if there are other items that have not been processed through payroll that you need to modify for their W-2s at this point, then you'll click on this Edit W-2 Info button. We can put in our tax year, and then depending on what items you may need to review or edit, there's a Select Columns button in the lower left corner. And so maybe we don't need to worry about the third party or HSA or Roth. Maybe we're just worried about deferred comp and fringe. Maybe you have dependent care. We can just leave those check marked. So now it's going to adjust those columns on our screen. So if there is any editing, or if we didn't have something set up as a pension, we want to mark that, you can go ahead and do that through this edit screen. Now for those of you that are doing health insurance, this is what we had a question earlier about the health insurance appearing on the W-2. At this point, what you will do, and this is, again, we want to wait till we've archived. You may, as part of our 1095 review that we did last week, viewing the months that employees were covered and checking for accuracy of your health benefit records. Because what the program is going to do is when you click on this compile DD amount, it's going to look at the annual health plan cost in the HR program and look at how many months they were enrolled to calculate the amount that needs to go on their W-2. So you come in and you click the compile DD amount. It's going to give you a printed report. So you can go through, print that out, and go ahead and review it. It's going to show you how many months the program has that they were covered. Then it will just go ahead and ask you. You can say no if at this point you want to review it first, but at the point that all of your benefit records are correct and those amounts are correct, then you will say yes to update those to get those to print on the W-2s. And again, to refer back to the W-2 instructions, that is going to appear in box, I think it's 14. Box 13. Actually, it's box 12, and box 14 is an overflow. Cost of employer-sponsored health coverage. That is not taxable to the employee. It's to make the employee aware of those amounts. So this question, if I don't have the HR module, can I manually change the figures? Yes. So you can, in your select columns, employer health coverage. So when you go to your select columns, Tracy, you'll select employer health coverage, and then that will enable that column, and you can manually go in and type those amounts in. We had a couple customers use UABT for managing all their 1095s and their insurance, and they didn't do a full record in our HR program. So if you're interested in that import, then email me, and I'll get you more information on that, because I don't have that that information handy right now. I'd have to verify with the program what's needed for that. Any questions on the edit? If you're making notes on that, Tracy, on the employer health coverage on page 36 in your PDF, it has to deal with that select columns. You can mark that employee health coverage is the one where you can edit that manually. So there's another question from Myra on that. So yes, Myra, that health coverage is calculated automatically. It looks, again, to the plan cost in the HR module. And then it looks to how many months the employee was covered divides that annual by 12 months and multiplies how many months they were covered to come up with the amount for their W-2. But you do have to click the button. So it's not like automatic, you don't have to do anything. You do need to come into this edit W-2 information, click on the compiled DD amount, and you need to review this for accuracy. Make sure there's no mistakes in your health benefit records. And then as long as that is correct, then you just say yes to update, and that will put them on the W-2. Any other questions on the edit the W-2 information? So I'm just coming in. Let's review. Anita, yes, we are gonna be posting this webinar. We'll have initially I'll get it on our screencast, which is just a hosting site, and I'll email that link out, and then we'll have an edited version on our website within the next couple weeks. We'll email again. So you have a profit sharing plan, the employee company deposit box 13. Okay, let me see if I can briefly tell what box 13 is. If not, I may have to get back to you, Ariana. Let's see. So the box 13, I believe this is going to pull from the first thing that you want to do is have the pension flag marked. And so if you see Ariana in the employee file, you can mark that they're on a pension plan. That should mark the pension plan box, and then you may need to look up for your particular plan for the profit sharing what code that corresponds to. And then you would select that in the deferred comp type. I'm just going to make a note of that, Ariana. I will just double check on that for you again, because I'm not an expert on tax plan, on the pension plan code. But if you know which code your plan falls under, that would go there, and the pension flag should be checkmarked. The health benefit record, Terry, yes, that's all in the HR program. So what we recommended in our webinar last week was to go ahead and compile your 1095 and reviewed the months that employees were enrolled, and make sure everything's correct as far as your coverage records. And then again, this compiled DDD amounts will pull from the coverage records to see how many months the employee was enrolled and calculate the amount, the cost of the health plan based on that. Elaine has a question, if you're not required to provide health insurance, you need to make an entry on the W-2. You need to make an entry on the W-2 if you are providing any employer-sponsored health insurance. It's not just those under the ACA. So even if you're not required to, if you do provide an employer-sponsored plan, you should print the annual cost of that, or not the annual, but the cost of covering the employee. Okay, I'll just give pause a minute if there's any other questions on that before we go on. Okay, if you don't provide any benefits, then that's fine. Yeah, then you have nothing to report there. Alrighty, so now, that may be a process that you are, work on to review the W-2 information. Again, you can start that, mid-January. You don't wait till the end, but you don't have to do it immediately. And then now we'll go through the year-end forms. So your 943 is similar to last year. There's not too many changes to that, and it's similar to your 941 process, in that the program is going to calculate all of your totals for each of the line items, and then it will calculate your liability from your tax liability report. And if you have not run the tax liability report, you'll do this update tax liability. And now you can see we're off, 40-something cents here. So we can use that adjustment to taxes to make an adjustment to our total taxes to match our total liability. And then we have our total deposits for the year. So again, you can run your payment list from the List Payments button, or you can run your reports from the EFTPS site that you make your payments on. If you have any COBRA, you'll do your COBRA. And then again, similar to the 941, you'll select if you're semi-weekly, which if you're semi-weekly, then you'll do the Schedule A. Or if you are monthly, it will print the monthly total. And again, if you need to make any adjustments that you want to make manually to that liability section, so here like we have the 64 cents. If we want to take the 64 cents and add it to the check date that should have been with, I can take that off and add that to another week. So your Schedule A will print from the 943A tab. You'll hit the preview there to print the tax liability form. This total on the second page needs to match your total taxes on line 11. If you don't want to use the adjustment here, you can also use the adjust tax liability, and that will make a manual adjustment to your last month, and it'll add the cents onto your last tax liability payment to make those match. If you are filling out the form for somebody, you can put in the third party, designee's phone number, personal ID number, and then you can fill in the title you want on the signature line and fill in the date. If you have overpaid, you can select to apply to next return or refunded, and then you hit your preview button to print your report. Any questions on the 943? Anita, I may not have mentioned all of the states that we do electronic. We do for most states. If you just shoot me an email, let me know what states you're reporting for, then I can double check the electronic reporting, and if we don't already do it, then we will add it. I mentioned just most of our most common states. But we have payroll in about 22 states, and I think most of them we do electronic reporting for. Now, we don't do an electronic form for the 943 as of yet. So we've had a lot of questions people have asked about uploading this to the IRS's website, and we don't do that yet. You could take this and fill in the totals if you don't want to mail it in. Otherwise, the blank paper is our reporting format, and you just print that out and send it in. Any other questions on the 943? Okay, so then your next form is going to be your 940. So we do the same thing. We just click on the Calculate Totals. And then if you have payroll only in one state, you'll fill in the abbreviation here. Otherwise, you'll have multi-state employer. And if you're in California, you'll have this mark that you're in a credit reduction state. Then we have our total payments. If you do have fringe benefits or retirement pension, you can mark those flags there. And then it will automatically fill in our credit reductions to calculate our total due to tax for the year. So similar to our other forms, then you put in your deposit to get your balance due. Now the one item with the extra credit reduction, that payment for the credit reduction falls into your fourth quarter payments. So in the tax liability section, when you do the adjust tax liability, it's going to put that credit reduction all in the fourth quarter. So if you haven't, even if you've been paying it throughout the year, you didn't have to, technically. It's part of the fourth quarter. So that's fine. You just leave that there in the fourth quarter. There's a question on what the dependent care box is. The dependent care is a benefit you can, employees can contribute to a special fund that they use to pay pre-tax. So basically up to a certain amount each year they can contribute. They may pay their care out of that fund, and all of those deductions are pre-tax. So one of my simple kind of things is if you don't know what something is, it probably isn't something that you're using. But you can look up the instructions for the 940 form for information about any of those other options. There's a lot of different pre-tax systems out there, and the HSA, I don't know if the HSA falls under that category. That may fall under other or may not even need to be marked on the 940 form. So again, we have a third party, and then we have the name and title, contact, phone number that'll print on the form. And, oh, I didn't grab our 940 form. Let me rename that. Some of these forms, we have not finished all of the programming because they are still draft copies on the IRS's website. So I have just been making copies of last year and renaming them. Do that. Sorry. How the other ones go? Yeah, let me do this. Let me just pull up 2015 there. It's going to be easier. So those boxes that you check there, those are for payments that are exempt from FUTA tax. So if you do any fringe retirement that are exempt, or if there's other, you might look at the forms and see if they're doing a cafeteria plan or something else that is exempt if it falls under the other category. So after the regular form prints, if you're in California, you'll have the Schedule A that has the additional credit reductions. Again, I've just used last year's form since I didn't have 2016. 2016 will be at 1.8, that will print that additional form with what's due for the additional credit reduction tax and be added into your total. Any questions on the 940? There's a couple other check boxes there. If it's an amendment, no employees are final. Those would be just used in special circumstances. That if needed. And again, your list payments button is in your lower left corner there if you want to pull up your history of payments. You're putting those in through the program. Now we get to the W-2. So we have the W-2 information button that we covered with the fringe, the employer, health coverage, HSA, any of those items. You'll do the edit W-2s first. And then when you're ready to print them, you'll go to the print W-2s button. Now, the first question we commonly get in our support department is nothing's coming out on our W-2. And often that's because you're an ag business and you just have to change the type of employees to ag. And white defaults to regular, most of our customers are ag, but that's a big one that comes up. We've left this laser.matrix here, but we don't technically support .matrix anymore. We hope nobody's using it. So that will be default to laser. Now, even though they're standard forms that we do, and in our W-2 information we have those form numbers, the L, 2, 3, or 4 up, different printers can feed the paper, a little bit differently. So what we recommend doing is selecting your form type here, and then just start with a single employee. And go ahead and print that form out. Then you can see if it lines up. You can hold it up to, hold it up with the paper, see if it needs to be adjusted, or just put one W-2 in. And then you would increase the top margin if it needs to move down. If you need to move up, then you can decrease the top margin. When you change these 2 per page, 3 per page, 4 per page, that will change the top margin. So you want to start from that new starting point and then adjust from there. Yes, if you have both types of employees, Tracy, you go ahead and run them. It runs them separately, so just go ahead and do one first. Once those are all done, run the second type. I think that may be factored into the W3. I'll double check off the top of my head. I'm trying to remember how that works. We'll do that in just a moment. So once you have your format selected and you've made your adjustments to your top margin, if you are ready to print all of your W-2s, then you can change your employees to print and change that to all. And then, of course, normally you'll be sending this directly to your printer. I'm just going to go ahead and do a preview. If you are filing on paper with the IRS, once you have printed those, it'll ask if you want to do the W-3, and then you can go ahead and put in your contact information and do your W-3 format. Then if you need to, here it's prompting me to do the Arizona. If you're in Arizona, you can do your A1. I'm going to say no. Then you would do your regular. And then you'll have your totals for your regular employees. Terry, yes. On the W-2s, for the employees that have health coverage, let's see. Yeah, I don't think I did health coverage on him. Let me see if I can. The code for the health coverage, on that prompt that I was at in the edit, W-2 information said compiled DD codes. So you'll see in box 12A the DD code and then the amount of their health coverage there. And again, that is not taxable. It's not added into their wages or anything. It's used to show the employee the cost of their health coverage. And again, you can refer back to the W-2 instructions. Code DD is the code that is used for that. And I'll be honest, I don't know that any employees, a lot of the workers know what DD means or know that that's health coverage, but those are the instructions. Now, one of the things that we talk about in our W-2 printing options is one of the things you can do is buy the 3, or you can order them from the IRS. You order them from the IRS in batches of 100. If you get the 3 or 4 per page form, then all you have to do is print 1 page for the employee. This format folds in half that into an envelope. And what we have a lot of our customers talking about doing this year is printing or including the 1095 in the same envelope. It's not recommended, but we have people that are electing to do that. So we talked about last week some of the 2 formats on the 1095. So if you want to use the portrait option and fold that and put that in with the W-2, that's an option there. We've had since our webinar last week about the 1095, some people asking about just printing the whole thing on blank paper and not purchasing or obtaining the forms. The whole issue and the reason why we recommend still getting the forms for the W-2s is because both forms have employee instructions on the back. And if you print them out, you're going to use a lot of toner, and you're going to have a duplexer, and it's going to take a lot more printing all of that information, all the instructions up yourself, than probably what's worth it, the cost of buying the forms. But that's up to you. So our 2, 3, and 4 per page, we are assuming that you are printing on pre-printed forms that have the instructions on the back. The employer copy will print the 2-page per form for your copy and then doesn't have any instructions. So you don't have to buy a copy D for yourself for your copy. We would just suggest getting the forms for the employees. And then of course if you're doing IRS, we like, just even if you don't have to, report electronically so you don't have to do a paper copy to the IRS. It simplifies your forms. A question on what format would work best to include the 1095-C. That would be the 4 per page. You can double check this with your form supplier, but I believe the 4 per page folds in half. And so you have a bigger envelope and then you just fold the 1095 in half. Now, if you want to just run a selection or a certain number at a time, the multiple gives you a selection box. You can hit the space bar. I don't know why you would do this, but you could hit the space bar, select a certain amount, and print just those. I could see maybe doing the multiple selection if you wanted to print out separately employees that are currently working, but there's no really way to then separate those from doing all the rest of them. If you ever have an employee come and request a W-2, you can always go to singled, and that gives you a lookup for the employee name where you can select just one in W-2. Now, last year we had a couple requests, and I meant to talk to the programmer on why these were added. I could see this on skip printing of employees with no addresses. That would be because you don't have any place to send them. So if you don't want to print those out that have no addresses, you can select that option. The exclude employees with invalid social security numbers, I would think that you would still want to send those if you have addresses, but obviously we have an option there because somebody requested it. I just don't know why. Yeah, the multiple option, if you have 5 that you need to reprint right now, you could use the multiple to go through and select 5 employees. Yeah. Any questions on just the printing of the W-2s? I'll close this window, but I'll come back in here. Okay, so then, again, we kind of recommend, even if you get your W-2s out, probably, like your last week of January or when it's convenient, when you're not, plan it out, you'll come in and select your electronic W-2s file. So then you'll put in your tax year. Then again, it will default the path to your WinLCO, WinFarm directory, wherever your main files are located, then your data directory, and then within that Mag Media folder. When you click on the Generate button, then it'll have you verify your company information, and you need to put in your Business Services Online user ID. This goes into the file that verifies that when you do the upload. And when you hit OK, it must be 8 characters. Longer. It will generate the file and give you your printout. Again, this is the page you want to keep. It has the location where the file is, the name of the file, and then your total. Now, we do have a video on our website of the upload process, I believe. Can't really go through the online process of uploading the file because I don't have a file to actually transmit. Oh, one thing while I will, I'm not sure if this last video includes the uploading process, but we might be able to add that this year. Some of the videos that we've done on our website, we've done in Spanish as well as English. So if you have any Spanish speakers and they would prefer to get some of this training in Spanish, feel free to visit our support training page, and then we'll have ones listed with Spanish if they're in Spanish. Anita, no, we don't directly sell the forms. We don't want to be a forms company. We had on our blog the company we work with, the Advanced Group. Their phone and email is in our blog on W-2 ordering information. Or you can order from any supplier, or like was mentioned earlier by another user, the IRS. You can request up to 100 copies in one order at no charge. So you could obtain them that way as well. So whatever is economical, most convenient for you. Office Depot, they have W-2s. You can get 2 just packs of them. The thing you have to be careful about is they have 2 different 3 and 4 per page forms. So you have to make sure you get the forms that's L3 up, L4 up. It's that specific form number. After you generate the electronic file, there is a little shortcut to get to the Business Services online form. So similar to the state, you will need to have a login and log into the site, and then you'll follow their prompts to upload the file. And again, when you get to the point of selecting the file, you'll use that printout to navigate to the data folder, and then magnetic media, and then the year. And your W-2 file will be the W-2 report. Now, one of the things that a lot of our customers do before they actually submit the file, and that is running it through the AccuWage software. The AccuWage software, we used to include it in our year-end update, but we are not, we can't get that installation now, so we give you the link to download it in our year-end help menu. Where is it here? Oh, it's here, Social Security AccuWage. So you can follow the link here to the socialsecurity.gov website, Employer AccuWage, and they'll have a download and install for their AccuWage program. That AccuWage will, then you do the same thing, select the file before you submit it, and it'll tell you if there's any errors that will cause the file to be rejected. And they will give you similar errors to what I mentioned on our archive file report. They'll tell you if there's missing names, missing social security numbers. Some of those things, it will still allow you to submit the file. But if you have a high enough error rate, sometimes they'll throw it back and say that you do need to make those corrections to be able to process it. And if you have any questions running it through the AccuWage, then of course you would use, it's a Social Security Administration program that you would contact them if you need. Now those that are in Arizona, I'm not spending a lot of time on the Arizona forms, but in Arizona, you would also have your Arizona A1R form. and that is also on the year-end tax reporting menu, and will generate your withholding form. I don't have 2016 yet. So reconciling your withholding. Some of the states just, you're kind of wondering if you're in California what those are for. Some states, they have different reporting agencies for unemployment and withholding. And so there's 2 different electronic forms there. So that's the Arizona A1R form. Any questions on any of those year-end reports before I just do a quick kind of review of some corrections and things that other things that may come up? Okay, so the things that always happen is, and this is why I mentioned, waiting to do your reports, is you do still, even doing the prep before the end of the year, is finding mistakes or things that need to be corrected after you've closed. And so some of these tools, we have some companies that restrict individual users from using these tools. So if you don't have permissions, you may need to go to a controller or payroll manager to be able to utilize these options. But our first kind of tool is where you can go back and reopen a quarter or year if you need to void or do additional checks and want to then go through the normal process of a re-archive. So to do that, you go to your payroll menu and then utilities. And then the option is on the fix employee totals. Then there's a change quarter year button. And so now we're at, already told the program we've moved to quarter 1 of 2017. Well, now I want to go back quarter 4 of 2016. What this does is this restores the quarter and the year totals back to the employee file as if we're still in that time period. So now I may, want to go and do some move options, move some checks. We went through the move payroll checks. Or maybe I need to add a check for I forgot the fringe benefits. I'm going to add some fringe benefits. Or maybe I'm going to do some of the void and reissue a check to another employee. Maybe there's some checks sitting around that we didn't realize were to the wrong employee, and we need to move them and actually create another check for that quarter. So all of those different options that we were talking before, that I was talking about trying to find things and correcting before the quarter closes, if you do after, this change quarter year opens you back into that quarter. On page 59, it just gives you a couple different scenarios of what may arise in that situation. After we've made our corrections, we can go back to our quarter closing, our control center, and we can rerun through our closing process and go back through and close the year. Now, some people are like, I don't want to deal with, going through the whole closing process. I just want to move back now to January. What you would do in that case, one of the reasons why we have the 6 employee totals, is because you can just manually run the fix here. So if you've made some corrections, you can put in your quarter and say that you want to fix the quarter and update the archive file. And then, I'm multi-state, so I can't do that. If you only have payroll in California, you can do that. And then you would also want to run the year. So we do the year-to-date and update the archive file. and then you can use the change quarter to move back to January. Now, the other thing about this is you have to be very careful that you don't do that while you have current payroll in the system. Because when you move back to a prior year, it kind of sets you back to that year that would be the effective tax rate. So you want to do the change quarter year when there's no open payroll for the current pay period. Is there any situations that have come up in prior years for you that you have any questions about how to handle corrections? Okay. There's just a few other frequently asked questions that we're not going to go through in detail during this webinar, but you can read through those certain simple scenarios that have come up in our support department. And again, there's the link to, if you haven't before used the state electronic reporting, there's a link there to the website for the state filing. So our goal is, we hope that you can begin reviewing your forms. If you want to do your archive, you're welcome to go ahead and archive manually, not through the control center because we don't want to clear. You could go to the quarter to date and year to date menus and simply do an archive without clearing. And that would allow you, if you want to start reviewing your 943, 940 forms to see where your tax payments are at, you can do that as well. But you'll go through the archive process again after your last payroll in December. So if we look at the calendar, you'll kind of want to schedule this out. I see customers all the time make notes on their calendar. Your last payroll, will probably be the 29th or the 30th. Now we have some customers, just because they like to have a clean crossover of their pay period, this last pay period of the year through the 31st or the 1st, some of our customers will still date that in December, even if they do it the following week, just so all pay periods are in the same year as the check date. And that actually gives you a little bit of a week rollover till you got to change and start your first payroll for the new year. But before your first check date for January, whether or not that's the 5th or the 12th, you'll need to do your closing process. Then you will have until the 31st to do your 940, 943, W-2s, your state reports. If you need to make a payment for the FUI credit reduction, I put in there, usually you have to make it by January 15th. I think since that's a Sunday, you probably have till the 16th. But you can check your rules on when that last payment for the fourth quarter has to be made for the FUI. Now, if you are trying to mail out the 1095s with the W-2s, then of course you'd have to include your 1095s when you mail them out by the end of January. But they did extend, as we mentioned in our webinar on the 1095s, they extended the deadline for 1095s. I mentioned this wrong in my email. The paper filing to the IRS is still due the 28th, but you have till the 2nd to mail to the employees. And the electronic reporting is by March 31st. And if there's any questions that you didn't get to ask during the webinar today, just feel free to email them to our support department. Again, that email is support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, at datatechag.com, just because I'm directly tied into the training, so I'm often on these calls several hours at a time, so anything pertaining to this, you can still call our support department for questions or clarifications. Thank you very much for your attendance. I really appreciate it.